Do you enjoy washing dishes by hand? I've met a few people who tell me they enjoy the process, and perhaps you feel that way too. But let's be clear, I don't. And that makes me ever so appreciative of Josephine Cochran. She was another person who didn't like doing dishes. So much, in fact, that she decided to do something about it. Let's find out more. Greetings, everyone. I'm Gail Macinda with History Heights, and our story today is about the invention and improvement of the kitchen device we call a dishwasher. Even those of us who do not have a dishwasher generally have things much easier than our ancestors did. Without a water heater or even running water, taking care of the dishes was a much more difficult and time consuming task than it is today. It was way back on May 14th of 1850 when Joel Houghton of Ogden, New York, received the first patent for a dishwashing machine. He called his device a new and useful machine for washing table furniture. That's what we call dishes. His design consisted of a cylinder made of wood or metal with racks to hold the dishes and a wheel with buckets to splash hot water. The user still had to boil the water and then add it to buckets in the machine. When the hand crank was turned, the rack would turn, and according to the patent, hot water would be thrown onto the rack upon the surfaces of its contents. Houghton believed that this was adequate to clean the dishes. Then, after they had air dried, the dishes were ready to be put away. His patent went on to declare that by these mechanical means, cleansing the surface of table furniture without the use of hands was possible. Well, maybe, except for that boiling water part and that draining of the dirty water part. And since we no longer use Houghton's design, someone obviously thought there were improvements to be made. That someone was Levi Alexander of Massachusetts. He had several patents for a machine to wash dishes, and while there were improvements, his 1865 patent was quite similar to those that came before. His machine was more compact because he put the splashing wheel under the dish rack, but it still didn't do a super job, and we are still dealing with that adding boiling water and draining it out when done. There were other inventors and inventions, but none of them made a substantial improvement until Josephine Cochran of Shelbyville, Illinois. Josephine Garris married William Cochran in 1858. He was a successful merchant, and William, Josephine, and their two children lived in a very fine home. The Cochrans hosted many large dinner parties and therefore had a lot of dishes to clean. One version of the story goes that the kitchen help chip some of Josephine's heirloom dishes while washing them. Another version says Cochran didn't trust the household staff to wash her cherished dishes, so she washed them herself and got tired of washing so many of them. And some versions say she chipped some too. In any event, she had enough dealing with the dirty and broken dishes. She came from a family of engineers and inventors and saw no reason why a mechanical device could not be built to deal with dirty dishes. And when no one else came forward to build the machine, she saw no reason to keep her from being the one to build it. And so she did. Years later, she reportedly described the process as, "I couldn't get men to do the things I wanted in my way until they had tried and failed on their own. They knew I knew nothing academically about mechanics, and they insisted on having their own way with my invention until they convinced themselves my way was the better, no matter how I had arrived at it." Josephine Cochran applied for her first patent and received it a year later on December 28, 1886, under the name of J. G. Cochran. This was no small accomplishment for a woman of that era. During the time she was still developing her design, her husband died, and as a woman and now a widow, with no income and debt to pay off, and needing money for daily living, she had a tough road ahead of her to raise the funds to build and then market her invention. She enlisted the help of a mechanic, George Butters, to help build the first prototype in a woodshed behind her home. The earlier dishwashing machine simply poured hot water over the dishes. Cochran's machine was the first to use pressurized water to get hot and soapy water onto the dishes. Here's an excerpt from the patent. After the dishes are thoroughly cleaned by soap suds from one pump, the racks are shifted so as to bring the other clear hot water pump into operation, thus automatically uncovering the proper tank in the bottom of the box. By this means, a stream of hot rinsing water is poured onto the dishes until they are perfectly clean. When they are dry from their own heat, they are ready to be put away or immediately again used upon the table, no draining or drying being necessary after the removal from the machine. And I will add that Cochran built handles into those racks to make moving the dishes easier. A nice practical touch, Mrs. Cochran. So she invented a machine of gears, belts, and pulleys that could accommodate a cage filled with over 200 dirty dishes. And those dishes would reappear minutes later, as clean as if they had been washed by hand. Her machine cleaned flatware as well as the dishes. Now that her patent application was approved, she had to sell her machines. Cochran wanted her machine to help alleviate the drudgery of housework for the average woman, so she wanted to market her machine directly to women. She sold some machines to friends and neighbors and put ads in local newspapers. But there was a problem. Her machine was over $100, almost $3,300 in today's value, and most households of that time, just like most households of today, simply could not afford it. And even when they could, the woman wasn't likely to be the one deciding how the household money would be spent. Many husbands were not going to spend a large amount of money on a machine to do something he felt his wife could do for free. That left Cochran with no choice but to market her dishwashing machine to large hotels and restaurants. It's hard for many of us today to imagine just how difficult it was for Cochran to sell her machines. This newspaper clipping from 1891 describes a common attitude. A Champagne woman, and let's notice that her name is not provided, has patented a dishwashing machine, and the Gazette says it works like a charm. That may be. But the most satisfactory dishwasher we ever saw was about 16 years old, had her sleeves rolled up to her shoulders, and wore a blush as red as a cherry. That sort of dishwasher ought to be good enough for anybody. Josephine Cochran was good at sales. That was not the problem. It was more an issue of what was or was not acceptable for a woman of her social status to do. Cochran later described one of her sales calls in a large hotel this way. It was almost the hardest thing I ever did, I think, crossing the great lobby of the Sherman House alone. You cannot imagine what it was like in those days for a woman to cross a hotel lobby alone. I had never been anywhere without my husband or father. The lobby seemed a mile wide. I thought I should faint at every step, but I didn't. And I got an $800 order as my reward. Cochran struggled to get the money needed to manufacture her machines, but by 1890, her dishwashing machines were being manufactured by F.B. Tate and Company in Decatur, which is not far from Shelbyville. The dishwashers continued to be purchased by large hotels, restaurants, and colleges. One newspaper article about these dishwashers stated that this machine washes, rinses, and dries the dishes without the necessity of the operator touching the water. 4 persons now do the work, which formerly required 12. She continued talking with potential investors, but they, and we're talking about men here, wanted her to resign and let men run her company before they would invest. She didn't resign, but she did get her company incorporated and funded. If you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments how you feel about washing dishes and the dishwashing machine. Personally, I'm glad she kept at it because finally things began to change for Josephine Cochran. In 1893, Cochran exhibited her dishwashers in Machinery Hall of the Columbian Exhibition World's Fair in Chicago. There were many wonderful inventions on display there, but this was the only one on display that was invented by a woman. The World's Fair supervisors were certainly expressed with her invention. 9 of them were in use at some of the big restaurants on the fairgrounds. Exposition judges were impressed too. They awarded it the highest prize for best mechanical construction, durability, and adaptation to its line of work. The 1893 Columbian Exposition was a marvel, and I'll put a list of other stories from the exposition up here, and again in the description and comment box down below. Her product, now known as the Garris Cochran dishwasher, was a success. Sales were coming in more quickly now, and in addition to restaurants and hotels, hospitals began using a large model of the Garris Cochran dishwasher due to the strict sanitation requirements. And it was efficient. The large model could now wash and dry 240 dishes in just 2 minutes. On August 3rd, 1913, at the age of 74, Josephine Cochran died at her home in Chicago. 4 years after her death, she received a second patent for improvements to her dishwashing machine. In 1926, Cochran's Crescent Dishwashing Company was purchased by Hobart Manufacturing. Hobart manufactured dishwashers under the KitchenAid brand, and that became part of the Whirlpool Corporation in 1986. Through the years, many refinements by other people have been made to the dishwasher. After World War II, kitchen design itself changed with standardized cabinet sizes and counter heights. Dishwashers were then built to specifications to allow them to fit underneath the countertop. Josephine Garris Cochran was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame in 2006. By that time, it was estimated that nearly 70% of all homes in the United States had dishwashers installed. We can learn from the past, but we do not live there. Go be awesome today and make your own history. Stick around for another great story.